Let's explore CSS animation using the animation property. This is a powerful feature that was introduced in CSS 3 that used to only be achieved through JavaScript or plugins like Flash. But now we can animate styles with pure CSS in dynamic and exciting ways, as really nothing captures attention as much as motion. Of course, with great power comes great responsibility, and good motion design should be tasteful, help communicate meaning or serve the brand, and focus attention rather than being distracting. That said, let's explore what we can do. As you can see, I have an H1 tag right here with the word animation in it, and of course I want to animate that. I'll do so exploring these different animation properties, including animation name, duration, timing function, delay, iteration count, direction, fill mode, place date, and timeline. If you're unfamiliar with some of these, you're in luck because we're going to cover them all. But we only need a couple of them to get started, really animation name and duration. And so let's go ahead and populate our CSS with those things. I've got an animation name here, and I'm just going to call this Move Me. And really, I could call it anything I want. I could call it Carl. Provided it makes sense to you, this is your own name for this. And then I also need a duration. How long is this animation going to take? I'm going to say 3 seconds, but I could also define things in milliseconds. I'll say 3 seconds. After that, all I really need to do now is create an @keyframes rule. And that @keyframes rule has to have the same name as my animation name right here. So this is where we actually define what the animation is going to do. That goes in between an opening and closing curly brace. And then inside of there, we have to define two things. Where are we starting and where are we ending? In other words, the from and the to, or the 0% and the 100% of our animation. So let's say what I was doing was animating the font size. What I could do is type in the property inside, again, the curly braces that are here, and say how I want this to begin. And I can also say how I want that font to end. What's the end of my animation? And let's say I make that 6M. You'll notice that we're ending at a size beyond the beginning default here. And you'll see what happens when we do that. I can hit save here, refresh, and we'll see our animation. Takes 3 seconds to fully animate from 1M to 6M, but then you'll notice that it pops back to the original position. And that's the default for our CSS animation, is once it's done, it returns back to whatever other sizes we've defined, for example, in our CSS. If we didn't want it to do that, we wanted to end where we wanted it, we could use a property called animation fill mode. And if I add that to my list here, and I said that I wanted my animation fill mode to simply progress forwards, you'll see that the animation now ends at the font size of 6M. So depending if we're moving back and forth, whatever, you can have this fill mode be backwards, you can have it be forwards, or you can say both, in which case it will end on our to declaration or wherever we've sort of ended here. Now, I might not even need that animation fill mode. I could take that off if I indeed animated to the font size that I wanted it to be in the end anyway. So if that was 4M and I animated to 4M, we would have a correspondence between how this is going to start and then where it ends being the same as our sort of default size, or the size that I've already defined for that. Now, most people don't necessarily put every single property name in there. Instead, they use the shorthand, which is simply animation, and then they give you the name and the length, for example. So I had this at move me and 3 seconds. I could define that simply in shorthand without having to type out each of these property names. And that will work as well. Once I save this out and refresh, we're getting the same behavior happening. Another way that I could have written these keyframe rules here is, instead of using from, I could have said 0%. And instead of to, I could say 100%. And so these correspond to some of the timing of this. So let's say I had a 4-second animation here. And that would mean that 50% of the way through would be 2 seconds. and 100% of the way through would be the full 4 seconds of this. At 0%, we're at 0 seconds, obviously. So I could use from and to, which are the keywords we could use, or we can use percentages in there. So if I save this out, we're going to see no change in our animation. We're still going, from 0% to 100%. But if I wanted something to be a little bit different, let's say I wanted it to get smaller before it got bigger, I could make the font size at 10%, for example. Maybe that's only going to be 0.5 em. And then maybe like 90% of the way through, I actually want it to be a little bit bigger. And I might say that the font size is 4.5 em. And so in this case, we're going to get a little smaller first and then get larger and then get a little larger than what we're going to end on, and then return back to our final position. So smaller first, then a little too large, and then receding back into our final position. Let's create a different at keyframes rule. I'm going to go ahead and say at keyframes, and let's say what I wanted to do was rotate my word. I'm going to go ahead and say that I want to rotate, and I'm going to define a spin for this. So the spin here, I might say that I wanted this to spin around, and in theory I don't even need both the from and the to. Typically you're going to have from and to, but the only one I really need is the to. Like if we just have to, that it will start from its original position and simply animate to this new position. So in theory, I could actually get rid of the from and make this even simpler. And let's say what I wanted to do was make a transformation for rotation. Well, I can use the rotate property here. And let's say I wanted it to rotate like all the way around 360 degrees. Great, I'll do that, and that would be the spin. Then what I need to do is assign that back to my H1. So instead of the move me that's here, what I might do is assign the spin animation. You can see that kicking in that case. And so it's taking 4 seconds to spin around in a circle. You'll note that this animation happens immediately. Right when I refresh the browser, the animation occurs. If we wanted, we could have a delay before animation starts. So that's the property called animation delay. And what we could do is add any kind of delay to this that we wanted, such as, I want it to take about 2 seconds before it even starts. And so I'm going to go ahead and leave this as spin. I'll comment out the general one here, but when we save and refresh this, you'll see that there's 2 seconds that go by before the animation actually starts. So we can always put in that delay, and if I was doing this with the shorthand, all I'd have to do is add the delay after the duration. So it's always going to read this with the duration first, and then if I have another duration, that would be the delay that's after that. And so I could comment out these other elements that are here and just play this out with our shorthand. And when we refresh, there's a 2-second delay, and sure enough, there goes our animation. Let's say what I wanted to do is both have the move me animation and the spin animation. Well, you could do that by having a comma separated list. So what I might do is say that I wanted the move me to let's say go first, and I want that to only take 2 seconds with no delay. Then I could have the spin animation happen after we've completed the move me animation. So you'll see that if we comma separate the list, this keyframe animation is going to operate for 2 seconds, and because of the delay on the other one, the spin's not going to happen until after that first one completes. So we can string some animations together in that sense, where that spin doesn't occur until the first animation has completed. If I didn't have a delay on here, then it would do both of these animations at the same time, except the spin would take longer than the move. So let's try that out. If I save this and refresh, you'll see that it's both moving and animating at the same time, but the spin just had a longer timeline to it. Let's add even a little bit more fun to this. So let's say I did define some from properties here. So I'm going to say from 0 degrees. And then I wanted this to spin around, but I also wanted it to, for example, change color. So what I could do is define more than one property here. So I'm going to say, hey, you're going to start with the color blue, and then I'm going to have it end with the color red. So let's go ahead and put that in there with the color red. And what I think I'll do here is get rid of doing two different things here and just focus on the spin. So I'll just have the spin. I'm going to have that take maybe only like 1 second, and then I'll comment this other one out. We can save that, do a little refresh over here, and we'll see that we're getting the full spin and we're getting our color properties happening here. I'm going to leave that to be a little bit longer, and because I didn't want it to return to black, and I've not defined a color for this, it's going to the default. If I didn't want it to come back and I wanted it to stay red at the very end of the animation, I would use my animation fill mode. So what I might do is add the word both, the keyword both, to this, and that would then animate and then end on its end beginning there. So you can see that it's defaulting here now to red. Cool, so we're getting a little bit of this, but maybe it happens just a little too fast. I could have a 1 second delay. We can continue to add our properties here to dial in our animation. So now when I reload this page, there's 1 second before we actually do the animation from blue to red. Let's say in the middle of that I wanted to do something. I could always take the 50% point, for example, and I can mix and match the from and to keywords, which really stand in for 0% and 100%, and just throw a 50% in there. And what I might also do is, for example, scale this. So let's do a transformation in the scale, and I could refresh this, and you'll see that it's going to scale up and then scale back down here, which is kind of fun. Now, you may notice that when this spins, it actually sort of slows down at the end. And that's because there's a default timing function that's a part of that. That timing function is the ease. And so when I add ease, we really get the same animation there. And I could change this timing function out. If I wanted it to be a linear animation, meaning that it's going to progress without gaining or losing momentum, it's always going at the same speed, I would have the timing function be linear. That's usually not as interesting, and typically you might use either an ease out animation, which kind of slows down at the end and starts a little faster, or an ease in timing function, which is going to start slower and then speed up. Or you could do ease in and out, which would make it start a little slower, speed up, and then slow down at the end. So all of those are potential timing functions, and you could also actually have your own custom timing functions there as well. Custom timing functions are defined through a cubic Bezier curve, and there's a handy website that helps you figure out the numbers you want for this, called cubicbezier.com. And what you could do is actually get your own sort of keyframe sort of animations here. So what I could do is define my own cubic Bezier curve here, and we could compare that to some of the defaults that are out there, linear animations, ease in, ease out. And you could simply preview the comparison. I can hit go, and we could see that the one that I defined, which is on top here, has a very different sort of speed to it than the typical ease that's there. If that's the definition that I was going for, that I really wanted, I could hit copy right here and then go back to my code and paste that in as my timing function. And that would be a way of defining a custom timing function, and I could hit save on that and then refresh my animation, and you'll see that we get this sort of unique timing function that's there that goes really fast at the beginning, slows down in the middle, kind of goes fast at the end. I think it's pretty cool that I can define my own timing, but I am going to use some of the default keywords here, including just the ease in and out, which means I'm going to start slow, speed up, and then end slow. Okay. So we've covered name, duration, timing function, delay. What we haven't done is direction and iteration count. Let's explore those properties. By default, our animation direction is normal, meaning that we're going to progress from 0% to 100%. But let's say we actually wanted to animate backwards. One of the things we could do is just have an animation direction of reverse, and that means we're going to go the other way. In this case, you'll see that we're ending with the color blue and beginning with the color red. And we're actually just running as if our timeline is in reverse in that case. Starting with red, we're rotating the other direction, and they're ending with blue. So that's reverse. Another thing we could do is have an animation direction of alternate. And maybe what we'd like to do is have our animation go forward and then alternate back, for example, to the other way. Once we add alternate here, though, we're still only getting a single animation to begin with, and that's because we don't have a iteration count of more than one. By default, the iteration count on something is going to just be one time. And so if you wanted this to happen more than once, you could put a value in there. So let's say I added 2 to the end of this. Now, when we play this out, we've got an animation that will play in, and that will play back out. And it's ending here with this in blue, how it began, partly because our fill mode says that we can go in both directions. Now, of course, our iteration count, currently 2 here, could go to some other value. Maybe we want this to go 3 times. And so once I have an iteration count of 3 and we refresh this, we'll get the animation happening, and it's going to occur 3 times in this case. So it went in and out and back with the alternations that are there. If we just wanted to keep this going, you could also have a iteration count of infinite, and that means that your animation just never stops. It just keeps animating on you over and over and over again. Usually that's not necessarily preferred. Oftentimes it's more tasteful to have animation that sort of at least ultimately stops, and so I might keep this with an iteration count of only 2 in that case, and when we refresh with that, we'll get our animation play in and play out, and we're done. Okay, so one of the last properties that we really haven't explored here is animation play state. And by default, our animation play state is running. In other words, it's going to happen. I'm going to take away the delay that was here, and that would allow this animation to happen automatically. So it happens right away. But if I added an animation play state of paused to this, you'll see that if I save this and refresh, we'll get no animation. So we can have a play state of paused, and I could also have a play state of running. But what I might want to do is change this. For example, we could trigger something with JavaScript to change it from paused to running, or maybe on hover, for example. So let's say what I wanted to do is give the user the ability to change the animation play state when they hover over. What I could do is take that animation play state property and change it from running to paused. Once I hit save with this and we refresh, when I roll over that H1, it pauses. As soon as I roll back off, it'll go back to the running. But this gives the user maybe some ability to interact with our element. So if I'm sort of rolled over it somewhere, it will pause. When I roll back off, it will run. And I can pause that in any place with animation play state. This is useful when you want a user to see your animation when they're interacting with it, such as when they're hovering over or they clicked on it to make it active or something like that. You could change the play state. Or if you were doing some sort of slideshow work, maybe when they roll over it, they could pause that animation. There are so many fun things you can do with animation. Let's go ahead and just define maybe one more to explore this just a little bit further. So let's say what I wanted to do was do a kind of reveal animation. I'll go ahead and just call this reveal, and I'll define my animation here. I'm going to say at 0%, I might have a couple different properties. So for example, I want to reveal it. So at 0%, I might have a filter on here, and that filter might have the opacity at 0, and I'm also going to have like a blur on there, and I'm going to have like a very blurry image here. Let's say it was like 20 pixels of blur that are there. So that's at 0%. And then what we'll do is say 100%, we're going to take those filter elements and we're going to change that. I'm going to say opacity is then going to be 1, and blur, which I spelled blur, blue, I'm going to make the blur go to 0 in that case. And so that will have no blur on it at the very end. All right, so let me go ahead and add my semicolons here to say that I'm done with that property definition. And I wanted to apply this at keyframes reveal. So coming down here, what I might do is comment out the old one that we were working with, and I'll go ahead and just reference that. So all I really need is to say reveal, and for how long is that going to take? Let's say I wanted it to take 2 seconds. With those two things, we could take a look at what happens with our animation. When I refresh it, we're going to be fading in from a blur and then to full. It seems like that would be fun if we also did something with scaling. And so maybe I have some other properties here. And sometimes what I'll do is kind of bring them onto their own lines like this, so I can see each property that I'm scaling or whatever, or changing. So I might also play around with a transformation for scale. So I could say that I wanted to transform, and we would set the scale to a particular size. And so let's say we wanted it to start sort of small, like 0.5, and then scale up to large at the same time. So I could do it this way, or we can do it with more of the shorthand property for that, which I find to be easier. So I'll just say scale 0.5, and then I'll have a second property here where we'll be at our real scale. And what I'm going to do is make this go a little bit big right at the 90% mark, where it's going to get quite a bit bigger before it scales back down. So just here at 90%, the only thing that I wanted to affect was the scale, and I'm going to have it go all the way to 1.5 and then scale back down here for the last 10%. All right, once I save that, we can take a look at what that looks like. It's really large and kind of zooms back because it only takes 10% to go 50% of the way back to scale. But you'll see that the blurring kind of happens across the entirety of the animation, as well as the opacity pieces. So you have to play with at keyframe animations. There's so much that you can do. Take a look at any CSS properties that have numerical values that are a part of them. Those are things that are animatable. So happy exploring CSS animation. In an upcoming video, I'll explore the animation timeline, which is a brand new feature within CSS. It's not supported in all the browsers yet, but it allows us to tie our animations to the scroll bar. And so that instead of just having a time-based animation, we might have animation that is tied to the scroll behavior of something. So that's upcoming.